I think there must be something wrong with me, Jake. Avengers Endgame is coming, but I'm not that excited.
Nichols, Nichols, Nichols.
Of all the Patrick Willemses in the world, you're the Patrick Willemsest.
Good grief, Patrick Willems.
It's the same dream every night. I try to figure out why I don't love the MCU more, but no one can give me an answer. People say, oh, it will all pay off in Endgame, or you have to think of the MCU as a TV series. But does it work as one big ongoing story? I flip through the comics, searching for some kind of answer.
The major innovation of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was transposing serialized comic book storytelling onto feature films. That means multiple ongoing stories existing in the same world, sometimes overlapping and intersecting. So let's talk about how comic book storytelling works, particularly in Marvel comics of the 21st century, which are the main inspiration for much of the MCU. At any given time, Marvel is publishing dozens of ongoing series, focusing on all the characters or teams you're familiar with. That means Captain America, Iron Man, Spider-Man, the Avengers, Captain Marvel, etc. For decades, these series have each released a new issue every month, and probably will for decades to come. Regardless of what's happening in various corners of the Marvel Universe, the stories about these characters carry on. About every year or so, there will be a big crossover event, something like Civil War, Secret Invasion, or House of M. These stories always end in a way that changes the universe and sets up a new status quo. And then that status quo is explored in the various ongoing series for the next year. After the Civil War story in the comics, Captain America was assassinated, and his series explored the fallout of that, as Bucky, aka the Winter Soldier, became the central character and took over the mantle of Captain America. Tony Stark became the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and organized a new team of government-sponsored Avengers. That status quo continued for 2 years, until the end of the event Secret Invasion. There, Norman Osborn saved the world from a Skrull invasion and took over from Tony Stark as the head of S.H.I.E.L.D., creating a new Avengers team composed largely of villains. And for the next year, Osborn imposed his will upon the Marvel Universe as the heroes tried to stop him. Iron Man's solo series followed Tony Stark going on the run to prevent Osborn from extracting information about his technology from his brain. Comics are fun. So to bring back the illusion of change concept, these are perfect examples. Sure, Steve Rogers eventually returned from the dead and became Captain America again. Norman Osborn was eventually taken down. But these changes in the status quo stuck around long enough that we got lots of stories dealing with them. We spent time with the characters reacting and adapting to the fallout of the big events. But the MCU doesn't quite work that way. Instead of releasing dozens of comic book issues per month, they release 3 movies per year. We're not getting monthly or even annual Captain America solo adventures. So here's where that matters. After Phase 1, each of the big movies ends with a seemingly new status quo. In Winter Soldier, S.H.I.E.L.D. collapses and Hydra returns. At the end of Age of Ultron, there's a new Avengers lineup. At the end of Civil War, the Avengers split up. These movies are the equivalent of the big crossover events from the comics. I mean, 2 of them even took their names from them. But what's missing are the years of stories in between the events that give the developments meaning and impact. The movies are jumping from big event to big event, but without the smaller stories in between, we don't really feel the changes. By the way, I have not watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the movie seem to pretend it doesn't exist, so we're not gonna talk about it. S.H.I.E.L.D. shutting down has no effect on future stories, especially since 1 movie later, Nick Fury shows up with a S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier as if nothing ever happened. Instead of Hydra being an ongoing threat, they're dispatched in the opening scene of Age of Ultron. The new Avengers lineup gets to do 1 mission at the start of Civil War, and then they disband. And after Civil War, the next story featuring those characters is Infinity War, the biggest of all crossover events. It looks like some stuff happened to those characters between the movies, but we never see it or hear about it. Captain America is just a supporting character in Infinity War. He shows up, he fights, he says hi to some friends, he has a beard. And that's where the effect of this is felt the most, with the characters. In the comics, if you want, you can just read Iron Man's solo series and you get a consistent ongoing story about him. But in the MCU, after Iron Man 3, there are no more solo Iron Man stories. So now, to follow Tony Stark, well, you've got to see the Captain America movies and the Avengers movies and even the Spider-Man movie. And since he's no longer the lead character, major developments in his life either happen off-screen or in movies where he's a supporting character. He and Pepper Potts break up, get back together, and get engaged off-screen between movies. In order to serve the ongoing MCU, the films have to skip over years of the characters' lives and reduce them to supporting roles. And there's no character who embodies this issue more than James Buchanan Barnes, aka Bucky, aka the Winter Soldier, aka the... what was it? The White Wolf? The best way to explain this is to look at the way Bucky's story was told in the comics, specifically the Captain America series written by Ed Brubaker from the mid-2000s, that first introduced the Winter Soldier. Like the movie, the Winter Soldier ran into Cap a few times, and then Cap learned the truth about his identity. But here's where it gets different. Thanks to handling the Cosmic Cube, which fake nerds know as the Tesseract, Bucky suddenly got all his memories restored. He freaks out, feeling overwhelming guilt for all the terrible shit he had done, and then over the next few stories, he starts trying to figure out what to do with himself. He helps Cap stop a terrorist attack, and then he goes to Nick Fury and asks if he can work for S.H.I.E.L.D. And then, when Steve is assassinated, Bucky ends up taking over the mantle of Captain America. The important thing here is that once he returned, and especially once his memories were restored, the series devoted a lot of time to Bucky's story. By the time he put on the suit and picked up the shield, he was a fully formed character that we understood and cared about. Now let's look at Bucky in the movies. He's in First Avenger for about 20 minutes total before he dies. Then he returns as the Winter Soldier, where we learn his identity about an hour and a half into the movie. In the climactic scene, we can see a bit of his old self beginning to creep through, and then the film leaves off with the image of Bucky learning about his past at a museum, which is a great setup for that character to have a journey of self-discovery. But we don't see that journey. Bucky next appears 2 years later in Civil War. He's living in Bucharest, and as soon as he shows up, he's already been framed for a terrorist attack. This is a movie that entirely revolves around Bucky. Whether it's people chasing him, protecting him, brainwashing him, or fighting him, most of the story involves him. But the only reason we're ever given to care about him is because Captain America cares about him. He doesn't make any of his own choices, he just gets thrown around like a human MacGuffin. Because of the constraints of trying to tell a serialized story in 2-hour feature film installments, we miss the entire story of Bucky regaining his memories and building a new life for himself. To us, he's still just the brainwashed blank slate. In the comics, Bucky is a fascinating character, and he has the potential to be in the movies. This is the guy who could take over as Captain America. But right now, he's kind of nothing. Now, I want to be extremely clear. What Marvel and Kevin Feige and their armies of filmmakers have accomplished is astounding. This is an unprecedented, brand new type of cinematic storytelling, and it mostly works. There is an enjoyable ongoing story and consistent continuity through dozens of movies over more than 10 years. But this system of telling stories has its drawbacks. What they're essentially doing is cramming the square peg that is serialized, interconnected comic book storytelling into the round hole that is feature films. I'm not actually sure if there's a way to solve the problems without just reducing the interconnectedness of the movies.
You're insane. You're sad because you're happy, but not happy enough?
I don't know what happiness is anymore. I know only ennui and despair.
Was there anything else you wanted to talk about? Because I have to practice.
Can you play something to set the mood of my aching and tormented soul?
I have just the thing.
Less gut-wrenching.
Oh. Okay.
The music brings back the questions that have haunted me for years. Who are Joe and Anthony Russo? What defines a Russo brothers film? Are they the David Yates of the MCU? And if so, why do I wish David Yates was directing these movies instead?
After Age of Ultron, Joss Whedon ended his involvement with the MCU, having been burnt out and frustrated by the experience. And so, the job of directing the big crossover event movies was passed to Joe and Anthony Russo. These guys, who were previously best known for directing episodes of Community and Arrested Development, great episodes, to be fair, were now Marvel's visionaries. So what happened? How did the Russos win everyone over and get promoted so quickly? I think it mostly comes down to one thing: the way they upgraded the action by innovating a new way of portraying Captain America's abilities. In Winter Soldier, his fights are faster and more physical, with extra speed and power to the hits. They're grounded but superpowered at the same time. It's genuinely an exciting way of showing what makes Captain America unique in a movie that has him fighting primarily normal human enemies. And that approach would be used in every subsequent film. But did the Russos really contribute anything else? Winter Soldier and Civil War are frequently praised for elevating the MCU, introducing more complex themes, rooting them in the world of modern politics and espionage, and skewing more towards 70s paranoia thrillers than superhero movies. I think that's an overstatement. Putting Robert Redford in your superhero movie doesn't make it an Alan Pakula film. When I revisited all 20 movies, for me it was the Russo-directed ones that suffered the most. Winter Soldier and Civil War introduce and briefly discuss some weighty issues: the notion of security versus privacy, the inherent danger of unsupervised vigilantes, and so on. But then these ideas aren't dramatized at all. In Winter Soldier, Cap doesn't have to grapple with being a part of something sinister and invasive, because S.H.I.E.L.D. immediately turns out to be run by evil terrorists. In Civil War, Cap and Tony briefly discuss their different views on government oversight, and then the Bucky storyline overtakes this and the debate fades into the background. The final conflict isn't about their ideological differences at all. These films are paying lip service to these ideas. They're posturing at being more serious than average superhero movies. But Civil War is not Watchmen. It's not interested in actually questioning the notion of superheroes. It says it wants us to feel guilty for enjoying the big destructive superhero fights, but then it wants us to laugh and clap at the big destructive superhero fights. And this would be easier to forgive if the Russos didn't also have the blandest visual style of any filmmakers in the MCU. I feel like they tricked everyone into thinking they were making grittier, smarter movies by making everything look like concrete. The films are constantly set in the most boring locations imaginable: gray offices and gray conference rooms and gray cafeterias and gray underground bunkers. Their epic battles are set in an airport and a field, both in the middle of the day. And before you say, hey, these movies look like cement because they're gritty spy movies. No. This is a gritty spy movie, and this is a gritty spy movie, and this is a gritty spy movie. This just looks dull. I mentioned last time how Whedon understands how to do cinematic versions of superhero comic splash pages, and you can see the difference when you compare how he does it to how the Russos do it. Look, Age of Ultron might be a mess, but it's Whedon's mess. His voice and visual style and thematic interests are all over it. The Russo films are tidier, but they're more generic. As Matt Zollerseitz put it in his review of Infinity War, on some level it feels ungrateful to ask a movie that already does the impossible to do it with more panache. But what are superhero movies without panache really good for? If there was ever a moment to swing for the fences, it was this one. The directors avoid risk. They capture both the violent, sometimes cruel action and the emotionally intense private moments in either a boringly flat or frantically hacky manner. Snap zooms on falling figures, herky-jerky camera work, and fast cutting during fight scenes, the same stuff you see in most action films made during the past decade. They use the camera in an expressive or poetic way so rarely that when they do bust out a heartfelt flourish, it's as if somebody had briefly sparked a dull wedding reception to life by going out on the dance floor and demanding a song with a backbeat. For all the spectacular events in Infinity War, there are shockingly few memorable images. On paper, this calls for something like this, or this. Images with real power and scope. This is a grand, operatic, intergalactic tragedy. So why is the filmmaking so ordinary? The Russos are perfectly fine journeyman directors. I imagine they're easy for Kevin Feige to work with and have fewer demands than Whedon did, but to me, these are not the visionaries who should be driving the universe forward. Look, I hate being mean to the Russos. I mean, they directed my favorite episode of Community. It's
Cooperative Calligraphy.
the bottle episode. Coming from an ensemble comedy background, they're great with actors and characterization. It's consistently a blast to watch these characters interact. The action is fun, and the movies are paced well. I think they're solid. Their work on these movies is fine. But I want more than fine. I want them to be great.
Is it even worth talking about the boring musical scores for these movies? Probably not. But why can't they all be as good as Black Panther?
You know what just really bothers me?
The color. Pat, you've been beating this horse for 7 years. We get it. You don't like the color in the movies.
It's like I don't even see color anymore.
Also, what are you doing? You don't smoke.
I do now.
All right.
I stare out at the colorless world. It's bleak, but still has a stronger aesthetic than the visual style of most Marvel movies. It's finally time to ask the question once more.
Wait, didn't I make this already? Wasn't this the very first video essay I ever made? Don't I owe most of this channel's success to that one video? The answer to all of those questions is yes, but we're gonna talk about it again anyway. The argument I made a little over 2 years ago is that the majority of Marvel's movies post-Phase 1 have the same flat, muddy look that's both kind of ugly and a poor fit for these colorful, bombastic superhero movies. And that hasn't really changed. The issue here isn't that all the Marvel movies shoot on the Arri Alexa. There are plenty of beautiful movies shot on that camera. Aquaman was shot on that camera. The issue is actually a two-part thing. The first is how the images are color graded. In general, Marvel tends to use a flat, low-contrast look with a neutral color palette. The lifted black look can be striking when, say, David Fincher does it, but in a scene without his strong aesthetics, it tends to look muddy and dull. The second part of the issue is how so many of these scenes are lit. Marvel's approach to colors tends to work better in controlled interior environments that lean into strong color choices with higher contrast. It's why Guardians of the Galaxy isn't hurt by this as much as most movies, since the majority of scenes are shot on sound stages with very deliberate lighting. The biggest problem is the exterior day scenes. Across the board, they're flat and gray and lifeless. Put any exterior day scene in any of these movies next to each other, and they're interchangeable. So Thor Ragnarok, the movie everyone points to as being more colorful and visually interesting, is when the scenes are inside and not aiming for a neutral daylight look. When it's a scene outdoors with neutral lighting, same bland, regular Marvel flatness. Unexpectedly, the one movie that figured out a solution to this is maybe the most maligned Marvel movie. It's Thor: The Dark World. The cinematography here consistently uses low-key lighting with hard backlights, kind of like that, giving the images stronger contrast. Exterior day scenes are shot with the sun lower in the sky, giving the actors more pronounced edge lighting and making the images more dynamic. Compare the scenes in Asgard, in Dark World and Ragnarok, and you can see the difference most clearly. What I find more frustrating than the blandness of so many of the visuals is how similar they are across the films. One of the great things about the Marvel Universe in the comics is seeing these characters interpreted by so many great but different artists. Just take a peek at the new releases wall in any comic book store, and you'll see a massive selection of different art styles. But with the movies, it's as if one kinda mediocre artist drew every series. It creates homogeneity when there should be variety. I've seen people make the argument that this is an intentional decision by Marvel to connect all their films visually so it feels like they exist in the same world. And I'm sure that's the case. But look at any other long-running film series and you'll see that thinking refuted. Each Harry Potter movie has its own distinct look, and that didn't seem to confuse anyone or hurt them at the box office. Rogue One and The Force Awakens don't look anything alike and still made billions of dollars. Honestly, rewatching all these movies, when I got to the first Thor and was reminded of how good these used to look, it bummed me out. This was 8 years ago and looks infinitely better than Infinity War. Pun intended. But Patrick, don't they all look that way to ground things in reality? That's probably their reasoning. And look, I'm not asking for these to look like Speed Racer or a Michael Bay movie or even Aquaman. I'm asking for literally any aesthetic choice as opposed to nothing. The Phase 1 MCU movies still managed to be hits despite being shot on film and having actual color palettes. I think seeing this same look over and over again is hurting Marvel's movies. These are movies about very visual characters in highly imaginative scenarios, and instead of looking unique, each new one just looks like another Marvel movie. If we're talking about the homogeneous look of the MCU, it extends beyond the cinematography and color grading and into the aspect of these movies that should be the most reliable and distinct. It's the action, the big superhero spectacle. Why is the least interesting part of these movies almost always the final battle? Even in Best Picture nominee Black Panther, for all its celebrated qualities, no one ever talks about how much they love the final fight scene on the underground train. Is this just a matter of us becoming desensitized to visual effects spectacles? Not really. Sure, we're not wowed by Spider-Man swinging through New York as we were in 2002, but even if the effects themselves aren't as awe-inspiring, that doesn't mean the scenes themselves can't be exciting. Plenty of recent blockbusters have had great action set pieces. The Star Wars movies, the Fast and Furious movies, Aquaman. I mean, even The Lone Ranger, which is mostly very bad, has a gorgeously choreographed, thrilling final set piece. So what's the problem with Marvel? Why does Ryan Coogler, who made that immediately iconic single-take fight in Creed, seem to drop the ball so hard with the finale of Black Panther? This is a complicated, systemic issue that affects much of big-budget studio filmmaking. The MCU is maybe just the best example. As the MCU has grown, two shifts have happened. One, the amount of visual effects in their films has grown dramatically, and two, the vast majority of directors they've hired in phases 2 and 3 have little to no experience with big-budget effects-filled projects. This results in the set pieces largely being directed by pre-visualization teams and VFX supervisors. Many of these people have worked on multiple Marvel movies, so if you're wondering why so many Marvel set pieces feel similar, this is why. Last year, director Lucretia Martel revealed that she had talked to Marvel about directing the upcoming Black Widow movie, but turned it down, saying Marvel told her, "Don't worry about the action scenes, we will take care of that." And because there are so many VFX shots, the massive workforce of VFX artists is stretched thin, overworked, and rushed. Changes are being called for late into post-production. Like, in Civil War, all of Black Panther's scenes were shot with a regular physical suit on set. But after production wrapped, it was decided that they wanted to adjust it slightly. So suddenly, Black Panther needs to be replaced with CGI for the entire film. There's a great article by Devendra Hardawar from Engadget that came out last year, which interviewed several people at prominent VFX companies. They explained that the increasingly insane demands put on the VFX industry have led to an overall degradation in quality, and often unfinished shots being put in the final films. So if you wondered why Iron Man's suit looks less real than it did 10 years ago, this is why. To compare Marvel's process to the other big Disney-owned blockbuster franchise, the recent Star Wars films have generally hired directors with experience handling big movies with lots of VFX. And even a movie as big and complex as The Last Jedi has half as many visual effects shots as Age of Ultron. It's telling that in the last 7 years, Marvel's action scenes still haven't come close to matching the Battle of New York in the first Avengers. They've replicated its mix of character moments, jokes, and action beats, but haven't made anything as memorable or exciting or visually powerful. And I know I can't stop bringing up how great Whedon is, but he had actual experience making action scenes and working with visual effects, and his style and voice are present even in the big set pieces. There's another change that began when Whedon left Marvel. I don't even know if I'd call this a problem, but it's a change. Basically, the MCU's interest in civilians and other non-superpowered people just kind of went away. A major part of the Phase 1 movies were the heroes' relationships with the regular people in their lives. I'm talking Pepper Potts, Happy Hogan, Jane Foster, Peggy Carter, and in his Avengers films, Whedon took that further, Coulson is there as a sort of audience stand-in, the ordinary human who looks up to the superheroes. He's a fan. He literally owns Captain America trading cards, and his death is a major motivating factor in the team working together to stop the alien invasion. Then, through the whole battle for New York, a lot of time is spent showing the team rescuing civilians, protecting civilians, and generally prioritizing the safety of the ordinary people. We get a lot of reaction shots of civilians watching the battle play out. Then after it's over, we have a montage of news clips showing regular people talking about the Avengers. We see the impact they had on society. The same is true of Age of Ultron. Through the Hulk-Iron Man fight, Tony is constantly working to keep civilians safe. And often the film will show the action from the perspective of the bystanders. The final battle is largely devoted to the Avengers trying to keep the people of the city safe. Whedon's focus on ordinary people is maybe best showcased in Ultron's extended visit to Hawkeye's family farm. Here, for the first time in these films, they are away from a battle or secret base, and just in an ordinary family home with an ordinary family. Whedon gives Captain America the final shot of the Searchers, looking in from the outside at the kind of life he will never have. In Hawkeye's family, we see the kind of people the Avengers are fighting to protect. Now, this is not trying to start a conversation about collateral damage or civilian deaths. This is not a Man of Steel situation here. It's not that the Russo-directed films, especially Civil War and Infinity War, put civilians in danger. It's that they seem entirely uninterested in the perspective of the non-superheroes. Civil War is all about a bill proposed by the governments of the world to control the actions of the Avengers, due to a shift in public opinion. But we don't see the public opinion. We only get the Avengers' perspective on this. Infinity War is an alien invasion movie about events that affect the entire world. But this doesn't feel like a global event because we only see this from the perspective of the heroes. You'd think there would be one of those classic scenes where the president does an emergency press conference to inform the nation of what's happening. But that doesn't happen. Civilians are never present for the major battles, so the heroes don't need to worry about them. It's actually kind of weird how the entire city of Edinburgh seems to be abandoned during the fight scene there. In the opening section of Age of Ultron in Sokovia, we see people protesting the Avengers, we see Iron Man graffiti. We actually get a sense of the world outside the superheroes and how it feels about them. Again, this is not necessarily a problem, it's just a change. But I feel like it's made what are supposed to be these really big movies more insular. They're less about the heroes actually being heroes and protecting the world, and more about conflicts within their group of friends, or protecting themselves. Like, in Spider-Man Homecoming, a movie about a hero who says he cares about protecting the little guy, the climax isn't about protecting the little guy. It's about stopping a billionaire's stuff from being stolen by a working-class guy. That's a little weird. In The Avengers, I really feel like New York is in danger. In Infinity War, I just feel like the superheroes are in danger. And before you post a comment about it, yes, I've seen the trailer for Endgame, so hopefully that does actually deal with some of the societal impact of the events of Infinity War. So what is it about Marvel movies? Why don't I love them as much as I want to? Why aren't I more excited about Endgame, the culmination of over a decade of storytelling? Well, it's all of it. It's the accumulated effects of all of these things. The lack of consequences, growth, and lasting change, the slide into more generic visual storytelling, the same standard look across all the movies, and the same kind of CGI-filled action scenes. The movies are, in general, good, but they don't feel as distinct as they could. The story developments don't carry the weight that they could. They're good, but they could be great. And of course, there's just the fact that we've seen a fuck ton of superhero movies over the past decade. They're bound to become a bit less special. But still, I found myself thrilled by Aquaman. Even though a lot of its character work and dramatic beats aren't as effective as Marvel's, there was a vision to it, an ambition and newness to the visual storytelling that felt unique. Or Wonder Woman, which dramatized its themes in a way Marvel's movies shy away from, creating moments more powerful and memorable than the MCU has seen in years. And of course, there's Spider-Verse, which is just on a whole other level, so it's not even fair to compare them. So I don't think this is a case of superhero fatigue. It's a case of the biggest franchise of the 21st century playing things very, very safe. And while they've managed to maintain a truly impressive baseline level of quality, it's also holding them back.
My despair has pushed beyond the boundaries of 1960s French cinema. It must take a new form. Swedish cinema.
Jag stirrar ut över ett ändlöst, färglöst hav. Likt MCU har inget slut. Det är platt, vidsträckt och oföränderligt. Men någonting fångar min blick. Är det en fiskmås? Nej, det är någonting annat.
There it is. I overlooked it all this time. The exception to the rules and limitations of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. These stories have actual growth and change, death and sacrifice. They commit to exploring their themes. They have weight. They make strong aesthetic choices and have a real style and personality. They're imaginative and funny, and the characters grow from movie to movie. And literally, as I'm writing these lines, the news hits that Disney rehired James Gunn to direct the third movie and finish the story he started. Is there still hope for the future of Marvel movies? I think so, but I can't answer that question alone.
Matt, if we're gonna solve this thing, we have to get an actual superhero in here.
Why? Like, to fight crime?
No, like an actor who plays a superhero. We'll talk to them about these movies and figure out the future of this genre. Get me Chris Evans.
Pat, I told you I don't like cold calling people. He's busy, obviously.
RDJ?
His assistant told me no.
Keaton? Kilmer? Toby?
Noby. Because of his name, and he said no.
God damn it. Anything?
Yeah, I've got the guy who plays the Tick's sidekick.
Are you fucking kidding me? I asked for an actual superhero, and you got me a Mothman from some 2-bit streaming service that no one's ever heard of.
Yeah, so should I?
You know what? I don't even care anymore. Book him. I'll talk to any loser at this point.
Griffin! Sorry about that. How's Monday look for you?
Yeah, Monday's still good for me.
Hi, it's me from the past, editing the video you already watched. Why am I editing on a laptop when I have a much bigger screen right here? That's a great question, with a long, boring answer. Anyway, I want to talk to you about our sponsor for this tasty morsel of internet content. It's Skillshare. Now, I get a lot of questions about how to make videos like this, and obviously one of the most important parts of the process is editing. But editing is a skill that you have to learn, and a great way to learn is with Skillshare. It's an online learning community with over 25,000 classes taught by experts and professionals. So if you want to learn about video editing or Adobe Premiere, the program I use, then check out the class by Jordy Vandeput. And if you're like, but I don't want to pay, well, you're in luck, because if you're one of the first 500 people to sign up at the link in the description, you get your first 2 months totally free. And after that, a subscription is less than $10 per month. So click the link, sign up now, and learn to edit. Or learn something else. I don't mind, it's up to you. Hello, welcome back, and thank you so much for watching. As you can see, part 2 was even bigger than part 1, and part 3 is gonna be a really fun time. And it's also the last part, then we'll be done with this thing. Anyway, if you didn't hear already, we've got a subreddit now. So that's the place to go if you want to chat with other people about this video, because it's just better than a YouTube comment section. And also, if you were not already aware, I co-host a podcast called The Infinity Podcast, which is sort of about pop culture through the lens of Marvel movies. So that's the place to go if you want to hear me talk a lot about Captain Marvel, because that doesn't really come up in these videos. Of course, follow me on all the various social media platforms. Check out the Patreon if you want to support these videos and help me maybe one day be able to afford to hire an assistant editor. And now I'm gonna go. I'm just gonna take a break. I'm really tired.